My husband Gary abandoned me during labor, claiming his law firm needed him for an emergency client. I delivered our son completely alone, exhausted and heartbroken. But when I glanced at the newborn in the bed next to mine, I froze in terror. Those eyes, the exact same unusual green with golden flecks, were identical to my baby's and identical to Gary's. The young mother beside me whispered, "He promised he'd leave his wife after our daughter was born."
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The pregnancy test sat on our marble bathroom counter like a small miracle. Two bold pink lines stared back at me, undeniable proof of the life growing inside my body. My hands trembled as I picked it up, studying those lines as if they might disappear if I looked away. "Gary," I called out, my voice echoing through our townhouse in downtown Portland. "Gary, you need to see this." I found him in his home office, surrounded by legal briefs and case files that seemed to multiply daily. His corner office at Sullivan and Associates kept him busy, but tonight felt different. Tonight would change everything. "What is it, Celine?" He glanced up from his laptop, his dark hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit I'd grown to love during our 2 years of marriage. I held up the test, unable to contain my smile. "We're having a baby." For a moment, the world stopped. Gary's green eyes, those distinctive eyes with golden flecks that had first caught my attention at a charity gala 3 years ago, widened with what looked like genuine surprise, then joy. "Are you serious?" He stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward, papers scattering from his lap. "We're really having a baby?" "We're really having a baby," I confirmed, laughing as he swept me into his arms and spun me around the small office. That night felt perfect. Gary called his mother Caroline immediately, his excitement bubbling over as he shared our news. She screamed with delight on the other end of the phone, already making plans to fly in from San Francisco to help with preparations. "Oh, Celine," Caroline's voice carried through the speaker, "I'm so thrilled! My first grandchild! We simply must start planning the nursery right away. I have so many ideas." Gary's sister Tanya was equally enthusiastic when we called her next. "This is incredible news. Uncle Cole is going to spoil this baby rotten," she said, referring to Gary's younger brother who lived in Seattle. "When are you due?" We spent the evening planning, dreaming aloud about baby names and nursery themes. Gary talked about teaching our child to play chess, taking family vacations to the Oregon coast, building a treehouse in our backyard. His face lit up with a tenderness I'd rarely seen, and I felt my heart overflow with love for this man who would become the father of our child. "I want to be the kind of dad mine never was," Gary said quietly as we lay in bed that night, his hand resting protectively on my still flat stomach. I knew Gary's relationship with his father had been strained. Emmett Montgomery had been a workaholic who'd missed most of Gary's childhood milestones. The divorce when Gary was 12 had only widened that gap. Hearing him promise to be different filled me with hope for our future. The next few weeks felt like living in a beautiful dream. Gary accompanied me to my first prenatal appointment, holding my hand as Dr. Harriet Patterson explained the changes my body would go through over the next 9 months. He asked thoughtful questions about nutrition, exercise, and what to expect during each trimester. "This is so exciting," he whispered, as Dr. Patterson prepared for the first ultrasound. "I can't believe we're actually going to see our baby." When that first grainy image appeared on the screen, showing a tiny bean-shaped form with a flickering heartbeat, both Gary and I started crying. He squeezed my hand so tight it almost hurt, but I didn't care. This was our moment, our miracle, our future taking shape before our eyes. "There's your baby," Dr. Patterson said warmly, pointing to the screen. "Everything looks perfect. Based on your last menstrual period, I'd say you're about 8 weeks along, which puts your due date around late March." Gary immediately pulled out his phone to take pictures of the ultrasound screen, despite Dr. Patterson's gentle reminder that we'd receive printed copies. He was like a kid on Christmas morning, unable to contain his enthusiasm. "I'm going to frame these," he declared, studying the blurry images with the intensity he usually reserved for legal documents. "Our first family photos." That evening, he insisted on taking me to Ashford's, the upscale restaurant where we'd had our first date. "We're celebrating," he announced, ordering champagne for himself and sparkling cider for me. To the future Montgomery family. The server, a young woman named Tina, who recognized us as regulars, congratulated us warmly when Gary couldn't resist sharing our news. "That's wonderful. Your first?" "Our first," Gary confirmed, his pride evident. "We're over the moon about it." On the drive home, Gary talked nonstop about his plans for our child. He wanted to convert his home office into a nursery, already envisioning where the crib would go and how he'd need to childproof everything. "We should probably start looking at bigger places too," he mused. "This townhouse is great for 2 people, but with a baby." "Gary, we have plenty of time," I laughed, but secretly I loved his enthusiasm. "The baby won't even be crawling for months after it's born." I know. I just want everything to be perfect." Those words would haunt me later, when I realized his definition of perfect didn't actually include the messy reality of pregnancy, childbirth, or the daily demands of parenthood. But that night, driving through Portland's quiet streets with my hand resting on my belly and my husband making grand plans for our future, I believed in the fairy tale we were creating. I should have paid more attention to how quickly that enthusiasm began to fade. I should have noticed when his questions about my symptoms shifted from concerned to irritated. I should have recognized the subtle signs that Gary's excitement was more about the idea of fatherhood than the actual reality of having a child. But I was too caught up in my own joy, too trusting in the foundation I thought we'd built together. I couldn't have imagined that the man who'd held my hand during that first ultrasound would eventually abandon me during the most vulnerable moment of my life. The fairy tale was already beginning to crack, but I was too blinded by hope to see the fissures that would eventually shatter everything I believed about my marriage, my family, and the man I'd chosen to build a life with. The first crack appeared during week 10 of my pregnancy. I'd been battling morning sickness that felt more like all-day nausea, barely able to keep down crackers and ginger tea. When Gary came home from work that Tuesday evening, I was curled up on our living room couch, still in my pajamas from the morning. "Rough day?" he asked, but his tone carried an edge I hadn't heard before. Not concern, irritation. "The nausea was really bad today. I called in sick to the gallery. I worked as an art curator at the Haven Contemporary Gallery downtown, a job I'd loved for 3 years. I couldn't even stand up without feeling dizzy." Gary loosened his tie with sharp, frustrated movements. "Celine, you can't keep calling in sick every time you feel a little queasy. That's not how jobs work." "A little queasy?" I stared at him, wondering if this was the same man who'd researched pregnancy symptoms obsessively just weeks before, printing out articles about how to support me through the first trimester. "Dr. Patterson said severe morning sickness is normal for some women," I said quietly. "It should pass by the 2nd trimester." "Should. That's a lot of uncertainty to base your career on." He walked to the kitchen without kissing me hello, another first that I filed away in the growing list of small changes. The second crack appeared at the 12-week appointment. Gary arrived 15 minutes late, his phone buzzing constantly throughout Dr. Patterson's examination. When she asked if we had any questions, I mentioned the persistent fatigue I'd been experiencing. "That's completely normal," Dr. Patterson assured me. "Your body is working overtime to support the baby's development. Rest when you can, don't push yourself too hard." Gary's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then at his watch. "How much longer is this going to take? I have a deposition at 3. Dr. Patterson's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of disapproval crossing her professional demeanor. "We're nearly finished. Would you like to hear the baby's heartbeat?" "Sure, if it's quick." If it's quick. The words stung more than they should have. This was our baby's heartbeat, the sound that had made us both cry with joy just a month ago. Now it was an inconvenience fitting into his schedule. As the steady whoosh whoosh filled the room, I watched Gary's face. He smiled, but it looked rehearsed, obligatory. His attention kept drifting to his phone, to his watch, to anything except the miracle happening on the ultrasound screen. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Patterson said, printing out new photos. "Baby is measuring right on schedule." Gary barely glanced at the images before sliding them into his briefcase. Great, we're good to go then?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Walking to the parking garage afterward, I tried to address what I'd noticed. Gary, is everything okay? You seemed distracted in there. I'm fine, just busy at work. This Henderson case is consuming my life right now. He clicked his car remote. Can you get a ride home? I need to get back to the office.
A ride home? Gary, we came together. In your car. He paused, key halfway to the ignition, as if genuinely surprised by this information. Right, of course. Sorry, my head's all over the place. The drive home was silent, except for his phone's constant pinging. Each notification seemed to pull him further away from me, from us, from the reality of the pregnancy we'd celebrated so recently. The third crack became a chasm during week 15. I'd been researching nursery furniture online, bookmarking cribs and changing tables, creating Pinterest boards of color schemes and decorating ideas. When Gary walked in from work, I excitedly pulled up my laptop to share what I'd found. "Look at this crib," I said, patting the couch beside me. "It converts to a toddler bed later, so we wouldn't have to buy new furniture as the baby grows." Gary remained standing, his briefcase still in hand. "Isn't it a little early for all this?" "Early? I'm almost 4 months pregnant. Most people start planning the nursery during the second trimester." "Most people don't spend weeks obsessing over furniture for a baby that won't be here for 5 more months. His words hit like ice water. "Don't you think you're getting a little carried away with all this?" Getting carried away? With planning for our child? With being excited about becoming parents? With doing what every pregnancy book and website recommended? "I thought we were both excited about this baby," I said, carefully, closing the laptop. "I am excited, but there's a difference between excitement and this." He gestured vaguely at my computer, at the pregnancy books stacked on our coffee table, at the ultrasound photos I'd framed and placed on our mantle. "You're consumed by it, Celine. It's all you talk about anymore." "It's our baby, Gary, our first child. What am I supposed to talk about?" "Anything else. Your job, your friends, current events. Remember when you had interests outside of pregnancy symptoms and baby gear?" The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. I had been thinking about the baby constantly, reading everything I could find about pregnancy and child development, mentally preparing for the changes ahead. But wasn't that normal? Wasn't that what expectant mothers were supposed to do? "I'm trying to be prepared," I said. "I want to be a good mother." "And I want to be a good father, but that doesn't mean I need to lose myself in the process." Lose himself? As if my pregnancy was something happening to him, something he needed to protect his identity from. That night, Gary worked late at the office. When he finally came home after 10, he went straight to his home office and closed the door. I lay in bed alone, my hand resting on my growing belly, feeling the first flutters of movement that I'd been so excited to share with him. The baby kicked gently against my palm, and I whispered, "It's okay, little one. Daddy's just stressed about work. He'll come around." But even as I said the words, doubt crept in like fog rolling off the Columbia River. The man who'd spun me around with joy at our pregnancy news was disappearing, replaced by someone who saw my excitement as obsession, my preparation as inconvenience, my growing body as a constant reminder of responsibilities he hadn't fully considered. I told myself it was temporary, work stress, adjustment anxiety, all the normal fears that came with impending fatherhood. I couldn't admit, even to myself, that Gary was already pulling away from us, from me and the child I was carrying. That his vision of fatherhood had been a romantic fantasy that crumbled under the reality of pregnancy symptoms, doctor's appointments, and the undeniable truth that our lives were about to change forever. The warning signs were there, bright red flags waving in a wind I chose not to feel. But I was too invested in the dream we'd built together, too hopeful that love could bridge the growing distance between us.
I wouldn't recognize the magnitude of my mistake until I was lying in a hospital bed, laboring alone while he chose his career over our child's birth. By my 20th week, Gary's transformation from excited father-to-be to distant husband was complete. The missed appointments became routine. The dismissive comments about my obsession with the pregnancy became daily occurrences. But it was the systematic way he began excluding me from his life that hurt the most. "I'm having drinks with the partners tonight," he announced one Thursday evening, adjusting his tie at our bedroom mirror. "Don't wait up." "Partners? I thought Alex Sumner was out of town this week." Gary's reflection froze for just a moment. "Different partners, from the Portland Bar Association, networking." I'd been married to Gary long enough to know when he was lying. His voice took on a slightly higher pitch, and he avoided eye contact. But I was 6 months pregnant, exhausted from a day of morning sickness that had evolved into evening sickness, and too tired to fight. "Okay, have fun." These mysterious work events multiplied: late meetings that ran until midnight, emergency client calls that required him to leave during dinner, weekend conferences in Seattle that he'd never mentioned before and came back from with no materials or business cards. His mother, Caroline, noticed the change during her visit in February. She'd flown in from San Francisco to help us prepare the nursery, bringing fabric samples and paint chips that she spread across our dining room table like battle plans. "Where's Gary?" she asked on her second day, glancing around our empty townhouse. "I thought he'd want to be involved in choosing the paint colors." He had to work late again, the Henderson case. The lie came easily now, practiced from months of making excuses for his absence. Caroline's sharp blue eyes studied my face. "Celine, honey, is everything all right between you two?" The question I'd been dreading. Caroline Montgomery was many things: opinionated, controlling, demanding, but she wasn't stupid. She'd raised Gary as a single mother after her divorce from Emmett, and she knew her son better than anyone. "We're fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just adjusting to all the changes. You know how men can be about pregnancy." "Actually, I don't." Her voice carried an edge. "When I was pregnant with Gary, his father couldn't wait to feel him kick. Emmett may have been a terrible husband, but he was excited about becoming a father." The comparison stung because it highlighted what was missing. Gary had felt the baby kick exactly once, during week 18, and his reaction had been more surprise than wonder. That's something," he'd said, pulling his hand away quickly as if my belly had burned him. "Gary's just processing everything differently," I said weakly. Caroline set down her fabric samples. "Celine, I need you to be honest with me. Is my son being supportive? Is he taking care of you?" The tears came before I could stop them. Caroline immediately moved to my side, her maternal instincts overriding her usual emotional distance. "Oh, sweetheart, what's happening?" "He missed the last 3 doctor's appointments," I sobbed. "He forgot our anniversary last month. He works late every single night. When I try to talk to him about baby names or the nursery, he acts like I'm bothering him." Caroline's face hardened. "That boy. I raised him better than this." "Please don't say anything to him. I don't want to cause problems." "Problems?" Caroline's voice rose. "You're carrying his child, and he's treating you like an inconvenience. There are already problems." That evening, Caroline cornered Gary in the kitchen while I was upstairs resting. I could hear her voice through the floor, sharp with maternal disappointment. "Your wife is 6 months pregnant, and she's been crying to me about how absent you've been." "Mom, stay out of this. You don't understand the pressure I'm under at work." "I understand that your father used work as an excuse to avoid responsibility, and I won't watch you make the same mistakes." "This is different. The Henderson case could make partner. This is our future." "That baby upstairs is your future. That woman who's been throwing up for months while carrying your child is your future." Their argument continued for 20 minutes, voices rising and falling like an emotional tide. Finally, I heard Gary's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in our bedroom doorway, his face flushed with anger. "Thanks for talking to my mother about our private business." "I didn't mean to. She asked if everything was okay, and I wiped my eyes. Gary, she's right. You have been distant lately. Distant, right. He loosened his tie with jerky movements. I'm working 60-hour weeks to secure our financial future, and that makes me distant? It's not about the hours. It's about how you act when you are here. Like you resent me. Like you resent this pregnancy. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not denial, not reassurance, but something that looked almost like relief at being called out. Maybe I do resent it a little, he said quietly. Maybe I'm not ready for everything to change. The honesty was both devastating and validating. At least he was finally telling the truth. But everything has already changed, Gary. I'm pregnant. We're having a baby in 3 months. You can't just decide you're not ready anymore. I know that. He sat heavily on the edge of our bed. I didn't expect it to be like this. I didn't expect to feel so trapped. Trapped. The word hit me like a physical blow. I was carrying his child, dealing with constant nausea, watching my body change in ways that alternately amazed and terrified me, and he felt trapped? I'm sorry our baby makes you feel trapped, I said, my voice hollow. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. It's exactly what you meant. Gary didn't deny it again. He just sat there, staring at his hands, while the silence between us grew into something enormous and unbridgeable. After Caroline left the next morning, cutting her visit short with tight-lipped disapproval, Gary's absences became even more pronounced. He started leaving for work before I woke up, coming home after I'd gone to bed. We'd go days without having a real conversation. The baby's movements became stronger, more frequent. During my 7th month, I'd lie in bed at night feeling our child kick and roll, wishing desperately that Gary was there to share these moments. Instead, I'd hear him downstairs in his office, on late-night calls that he claimed were work-related, but felt like something else entirely. I began to suspect he was having an affair. The signs were all there: the unexplained absences, the defensiveness when questioned, the way he flinched when I tried to touch him. But I was too scared to investigate, too invested in the fantasy of our happy family to face the possibility that he'd already given up on us. Looking back, I realized Gary had made his choice long before that final abandonment in the delivery room. He'd been slowly, systematically removing himself from our lives since the 2nd trimester, preparing for an exit strategy I was too naive to recognize. The man who'd spun me around with joy at our pregnancy news was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw me and our unborn child as obstacles to the life he actually wanted. The 8th month of my pregnancy brought a loneliness so profound it felt like drowning. Gary's sister Tanya, who'd initially been thrilled about becoming an aunt, began making excuses to avoid our weekly coffee dates. "I'm swamped with work," she'd text, canceling our Saturday morning tradition for the 3rd week in a row. Rain check? When I finally cornered her at Gary's office Christmas party in December, 7 months pregnant and feeling like a whale in the black maternity dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, her discomfort was obvious. "Celine, you look—" She paused, searching for words. "Wow, really pregnant." "Really pregnant," I repeated, forcing a laugh. "That tends to happen at 7 months." Tanya glanced around the crowded law firm lobby, anywhere but at my rounded belly. "How are you feeling? Gary mentioned you've been pretty tired lately." Gary mentioned, as if my pregnancy was something he discussed with his family when I wasn't around, rather than something he experienced with me as his wife. "I'm fine, the usual aches and pains. Dr. Patterson says everything looks perfect." I touched my belly instinctively. "The baby's been really active lately. Would you like to feel?" "Oh, that's okay." Tanya took a small step backward. "I'm not really a baby person." Not a baby person? Her future niece or nephew, and she wasn't a baby person? "Gary seems stressed," she continued, lowering her voice. "Is everything okay at home?" The question caught me off guard. Why would Gary's stress be my fault? Why wasn't she asking if I was okay, if her brother was supporting me through the challenges of pregnancy? "He's been working a lot," I said carefully. "The Henderson case is demanding." "Right, the Henderson case." Tanya nodded, but something in her expression suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Well, maybe things will settle down after the baby comes. After the baby comes, as if my child was a temporary disruption to Gary's real life rather than a permanent addition to our family. The conversation was interrupted by Alex Sumner, one of Gary's colleagues, who approached with his wife Claire. I'd met them several times at firm events, and Claire had always been friendly, asking about my work at the gallery and remembering personal details from previous conversations. "Celine, look at you!" Claire's enthusiasm felt genuine, a stark contrast to Tanya's awkwardness. "When are you due?" "End of March, about 10 weeks to go." "How exciting! Is Gary over the moon?" I remember when I was pregnant with Emma, Marcus couldn't stop talking about becoming a dad. I glanced across the room where Gary was deep in conversation with senior partners, his body language animated in a way I rarely saw at home anymore. "He's excited," I lied, "just focused on work right now." Claire followed my gaze. "Men, they have their own way of processing big changes. I'm sure he'll be wonderful once the baby arrives." But even as she said it, I caught something in her tone, a forced optimism that suggested she'd heard office gossip about my husband's recent behavior. The party was torture. I spent 2 hours watching Gary charm clients and colleagues, displaying the charismatic personality that had first attracted me to him. With them, he was engaged, funny, completely present. With me, he was polite but distant, treating me more like an acquaintance than his pregnant wife. "Ready to go?" he asked around 9:30, appearing at my side with his coat. "If you are." I'd been ready to leave since we arrived, but hadn't wanted to seem antisocial. The drive home was silent until Gary's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and immediately answered. "Hey, what's up?" His voice was warm, intimate, in a way that made my stomach clench with suspicion. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Gary's responses were careful, coded. "No, I can't tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Yeah, I understand. I'll call you in the morning." He hung up without explaining who'd called or what they'd wanted. In the old days, before the pregnancy, before everything changed, he would have told me automatically. Now, his personal life had become classified information. "Work call?" I asked. "Something like that." Something like that. Not yes, not no. Just deliberate vagueness designed to shut down further questions. At home, Gary disappeared into his office while I struggled out of my dress and into comfortable pajamas. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard his voice through the bathroom wall. Another phone call, this one lasting over an hour. I pressed my ear to the wall, hating myself for eavesdropping, but desperate for any insight into what was happening to my marriage. "I know it's complicated. She suspects something." "No, not yet. After the baby comes, we'll figure it out." My hands shook as I gripped the bathroom sink. She suspects something. Another woman. The affair I'd been trying not to acknowledge was real, and Gary was planning something for after our baby was born. The next morning, I called in sick to the gallery and spent the day researching divorce lawyers online. Not because I wanted a divorce, but because I needed to understand my rights, my options, what would happen to our child if Gary decided to leave. The websites were full of terrifying information about custody battles, child support calculations, the challenges single mothers faced. I closed my laptop, feeling more trapped than ever. That afternoon, my friend Harriet from the gallery stopped by with soup and concern. "You missed the Morrison opening yesterday," she said. "Sarah said you've been calling in sick a lot lately." Harriet Haven had been my closest friend since college. She was unmarried, childless by choice, and had always been brutally honest about her skepticism of traditional family structures. But she'd also been supportive of my pregnancy, throwing me a small baby shower at the gallery and helping me research childcare options for when I returned to work. "I've been tired," I said, which was true but incomplete. Tired or avoiding questions about why your husband isn't more involved? The directness was typical Harriet, and it broke through my careful defenses. "Both," I admitted, and found myself telling her everything. Gary's increasing absence, the missed appointments, his admission that he felt trapped, my suspicions about an affair. Harriet listened without judgment, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me empty months of accumulated pain and confusion. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I finally finished. "I don't know. I can't divorce him while I'm pregnant. I can't support myself and a baby on a gallery curator's salary. And maybe I'm wrong about the affair. Maybe it's just work stress and new father anxiety." "Celine," Harriet's voice was gentle but firm, "you're making excuses for behavior that would be unacceptable even if you weren't pregnant. He's emotionally abandoning you during one of the most vulnerable times in your life." "But what if he comes around? What if once the baby is born, he remembers why we wanted this in the first place?" "What if he doesn't? What if this gets worse instead of better?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I wasn't ready to face the possibility that the man I'd married, the father of my unborn child, might be fundamentally incapable of the love and commitment our family would need. Harriet left that evening with promises to check on me regularly and offers of practical support, rides to appointments, help with baby preparations, whatever I needed. Her friendship became a lifeline in the growing isolation of my marriage. But even Harriet couldn't prepare me for what was coming. The complete abandonment during labor was still weeks away, but the foundation for Gary's ultimate betrayal was already set.
He'd successfully removed himself from our emotional life, creating distance that would make his final absence feel like a logical conclusion rather than a shocking betrayal. By the time labor began, I'd already been abandoned in every way that mattered. The physical absence would just make it official. March arrived with unseasonable warmth and the crushing weight of my final month of pregnancy. At 36 weeks, everything hurt. My back, my swollen feet, my rib cage where the baby seemed determined to practice soccer kicks. But the physical discomfort paled compared to the emotional wasteland my marriage had become. Gary now spoke to me exclusively in logistics. "Did you pick up my dry cleaning? What time is your appointment tomorrow? Can you handle dinner? I'll be late again." We'd become roommates managing a household rather than husband and wife preparing for our first child. Dr. Patterson noticed the change during my weekly appointments, which I'd been attending alone since February. "How are you feeling emotionally, Celine?" she asked during my 37-week checkup. "This last month can be particularly challenging, especially for first-time mothers." "I'm fine," I lied, the same response I'd perfected for everyone who asked. "Is Gary excited about the baby coming soon?" She glanced at the empty chair beside the examination table. "I haven't seen him at the last few appointments." "He's been swamped with work, a big case." The excuse felt stale in my mouth. Dr. Patterson studied my face with the careful attention of someone trained to read between the lines. "Celine, I need to ask directly. Do you have adequate support at home? Are you prepared for labor and delivery?" The question I'd been dreading. I wasn't prepared for anything. Gary and I hadn't discussed birth plans, pain management options, or what to expect during labor. The childbirth classes I'd registered us for had been attended by me alone, taking notes for 2 people while surrounded by devoted couples practicing breathing techniques together. "I'm prepared," I said weakly. "We both are." Dr. Patterson made a note in my chart. "Remember, labor can start any time now. Make sure Gary understands he needs to be available when you call. This isn't something you want to handle alone." That evening, I tried to broach the subject with Gary as he worked at his laptop in our bedroom. "Dr. Patterson said the baby could come any day now. We should probably discuss our plan for getting to the hospital." He didn't look up from his screen. "Plan? You call me? I drive you there. What's to discuss?" "What if you're in a meeting? What if you're in court? What if—" "Celine, women have been having babies for thousands of years. Your mother managed to have you without a detailed evacuation plan." His tone was dismissive, irritated at being interrupted. "But what about timing contractions? What about our hospital bag? We haven't even—" "The bag is sitting by the door. You packed it weeks ago." He finally looked at me, his expression suggesting I was being unreasonably dramatic. "Just call when you need to go to the hospital. I'll figure it out." I'll figure it out, as if my labor was a minor scheduling inconvenience he'd handle when convenient. 3 days later, at exactly 38 weeks, I woke up at 2 a.m. to dampness between my legs and a dull ache in my lower back.
I lay still for several minutes, wondering if this was the beginning or just another false alarm. The pregnancy books had warned about Braxton Hicks contractions, practice runs that could feel like the real thing. The ache intensified, wrapping around my abdomen like a tight band. I breathed through it, counting the seconds until it passed. 20 minutes later, another one came. Then another. By 4 a.m., they were coming every 15 minutes with enough intensity that I couldn't sleep through them. I sat on the edge of our bed, timing each contraction with the app I downloaded on my phone, trying to decide when to wake Gary. The decision was made for me when a particularly strong contraction at 5:30 a.m. made me gasp audibly. Gary stirred, blinking in the early morning light filtering through our curtains. "What time is it?" he mumbled. "Early, but Gary, I think I'm in labor." He sat up, suddenly alert. "Are you sure? You've had false alarms before." "This feels different. The contractions are regular now, 5 minutes apart." Gary grabbed his phone, checking messages and missed calls with the reflexive motion of someone whose first priority was always work. "Shit, the Patterson deposition got moved to this morning. I have to be at the office by 8. Patterson deposition, not the doctor, a different Patterson, a legal case that apparently took precedent over his wife's labor. "Gary, the baby is coming. Today. Maybe in the next few hours."
First babies take forever, though. That's what everyone says. You'll probably be in labor all day. He was already getting dressed, pulling on the expensive suits that had become his armor against domestic responsibility. "I'll finish up this deposition and meet you at the hospital." "You can't be serious." "Celine, this case has been in preparation for months. Millions of dollars are at stake. I can't just not show up." "I'm having your baby." "You're having contractions. There's a difference. Call me when you're actually ready to push, and I'll race right over." "Call me when you're ready to push." As if labor was something I could schedule around his convenience. As if I could pause the biological process until he finished his deposition. The next contraction hit with enough force to make me double over, gripping our dresser for support. Gary watched with clinical detachment, as if observing an interesting but irrelevant phenomenon. "See, you're handling it fine. Women's bodies are designed for this." Designed for this, as if millions of years of evolution meant I didn't need or deserve support from the father of my child. He kissed my forehead with the same perfunctory gesture he used when leaving for work any other morning. "I'll have my phone on. Call if anything urgent happens." Anything urgent? Labor wasn't urgent? The birth of his first child wasn't urgent? Nothing about me or our baby qualified as urgent enough to interfere with his professional obligations. I stood in our bedroom doorway, watching him gather his briefcase and car keys, moving through his morning routine as if this was just another Tuesday. The man who'd once promised to be different from his absent father was abandoning me at the moment I needed him most. "Gary," I called as he reached the front door, "what if something goes wrong?" He paused, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, I thought he might reconsider, might remember that he'd promised to be present and engaged and actually interested in his child's life. "Nothing will go wrong. Dr. Patterson said you're perfectly healthy. This is routine." The door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot through our empty house. I was alone, 38 weeks pregnant, in active labor, abandoned by the man who'd vowed to love and cherish me in sickness and in health. I called Harriet, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. "I'm in labor," I said when she answered. "Gary left her work. Can you take me to the hospital?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Harriet said without hesitation. "Don't do anything heroic, just breathe through the contractions." By the time she arrived, my contractions were coming every 3 minutes, with an intensity that made me grip our kitchen counter and rock from side to side. Harriet took one look at me and grabbed my hospital bag from beside the front door. "How long has Gary been gone?" she asked, helping me toward her car. 2 hours. He had a deposition. Even saying it out loud sounded absurd. Harriet's jaw tightened, but she focused on practical matters. "Did you call to tell him you're heading to the hospital?" I fumbled for my phone between contractions. Gary's number went straight to voicemail, probably silenced for his precious deposition. "Gary, it's me. Contractions are 3 minutes apart. Harriet's driving me to Providence Hospital. Please come as soon as you can."
The 15-minute drive felt eternal. Each contraction seemed stronger than the last, and I found myself making sounds I'd never heard before, low, primal moans that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my core. "You're doing great," Harriet kept saying, glancing at me in her rearview mirror. "Just focus on breathing." At Providence Hospital, the maternity ward staff moved with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, I was in a hospital gown, hooked up to monitors that tracked my contractions and the baby's heartbeat. The steady beep, beep, beep filled the room like a reassuring metronome. "You're at 6 centimeters, announced Nurse Tina Sullivan, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands. "First baby?" "Yes, my husband should be here soon. He's finishing up at work." Nurse Sullivan glanced at Harriet, who was arranging herself in the visitor's chair. "Is this your birth partner?" "I'm her friend," Harriet said. "The husband is delayed." The euphemism stung. Delayed. As if Gary was running late due to traffic rather than deliberately choosing his career over the birth of his child.
"Well, baby doesn't seem willing to wait for anyone," Nurse Sullivan said cheerfully. "These contractions are strong and regular. I'd guess you'll be holding your little one within the next few hours." Over the next 2 hours, I called Gary 6 more times. Each call went straight to voicemail. I left increasingly desperate messages. "Gary, I'm at the hospital. Gary, I'm 8 centimeters dilated. Gary, please answer your phone." Harriet held my hand through each contraction, coached me through breathing exercises she'd learned from hastily Googled articles on her phone, and advocated fiercely when the medical staff suggested interventions I wasn't ready for. "She wants to labor naturally as long as possible," Harriet told Dr. Martinez when he mentioned an epidural. "Unless there's a medical reason to intervene, let her body do what it's designed to do." I was grateful for her presence, but her kindness only highlighted Gary's absence more sharply. This should have been him holding my hand, him learning breathing techniques, him making decisions about our child's birth. "Where is he?" I sobbed between contractions as transition began, the most intense phase of labor where the cervix dilates those final centimeters. "How can he not be here?" Harriet's face was grim with suppressed anger. "I don't know, sweetheart, but you don't need him. You're stronger than you know." At 2:47 p.m., after 8 hours of active labor, the urge to push became overwhelming. Dr. Martinez checked my progress and nodded with satisfaction. "It's time. You're fully dilated and the baby's head is right there. Are we waiting for Dad?" I looked at my phone one final time. No missed calls, no text messages, no indication that Gary even knew or cared that his child was about to be born. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. "We're not waiting." The next 40 minutes blurred together in a haze of effort and exhaustion. Push, breathe, rest. Push, breathe, rest. Harriet counted through each contraction, her voice growing hoarse from encouragement. "I can see the head," Dr. Martinez announced. "One more big push, Celine." I bore down with everything I had, feeling my body stretch and burn, and finally, miraculously, release. A warm rush, a moment of profound relief, and then the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. A strong, indignant cry that filled the delivery room and announced my son's arrival to the world. "It's a boy!" Dr. Martinez lifted him up, and I saw him for the first time, red-faced, covered in vernix, absolutely perfect. A healthy baby boy. They placed him on my chest, and I felt my heart crack open with love so intense it was almost painful. His tiny fingers gripped mine with surprising strength. His eyes, those distinctive green eyes with golden flecks that were unmistakably Gary's, blinked up at me with what seemed like recognition. "Hello, baby," I whispered, smoothing the dark hair on his head. Harriet was crying almost as hard as I was. "He's perfect, Celine, absolutely perfect." "What's his name?" Nurse Sullivan asked, preparing the birth certificate. I looked down at my son, this miracle who had fought his way into the world despite his father's absence. "Emmett," I said, choosing Gary's father's name, not to honor Gary,
but because I'd always loved the strength of it. Emmett Montgomery. As they cleaned Emmett and completed his initial assessments, I finally allowed myself to process what had just happened. I'd given birth to my first child completely alone, abandoned by the man who'd promised to love and cherish us both. The most important moment of my life, and Gary had chosen a legal deposition over witnessing his son's first breath. My phone buzzed with a text message. Finally. How did the deposition go? Hope it wasn't too boring. Let me know when things get serious with the baby. How did the deposition go? Our son had been born 2 hours ago, and Gary was asking about work. He didn't even know he'd missed the birth entirely. I stared at the message, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just neglect or poor timing. This was a complete abandonment of his responsibilities as a husband and father. This was a man who cared more about billable hours than his wife and child. Is that him? Harriet asked, seeing my expression. He wants to know how the deposition went, I said flatly. He thinks I'm still in early labor. Harriet's face went white with fury. He doesn't even know? He doesn't even know. I looked down at Emmett, sleeping peacefully in my arms, and made a decision that would change everything. Gary had chosen his absence. He demonstrated with perfect clarity what mattered to him, and it wasn't us. I wouldn't call him back. I wouldn't tell him his son had been born. If he cared so little about this pregnancy that he could silence his phone during labor, then he could discover his fatherhood on his own timeline. For now, it was just Emmett and me, and somehow that felt exactly right. As evening approached, I was moved to a recovery room where the reality of my situation began to crystallize. I was a new mother, alone with my hours-old son, while my husband remained oblivious to the fact that his child had been born. The absurdity was almost laughable if it wasn't so devastating. Harriet had gone home to shower and grab some supplies, promising to return by 8 o'clock. In the quiet of the hospital room, with only the soft sounds of Emmett's breathing and the distant bustle of the maternity ward, I found myself experiencing something unexpected: peace. For months, I'd been walking on eggshells around Gary's moods, making excuses for his behavior, convincing myself that his distance was temporary. But sitting in that hospital bed, holding my perfect son, I realized I felt more supported by his absence than I had by his presence in weeks. "Look at you," I whispered to Emmett, who was sleeping in my arms. "You came into this world exactly when you were ready, whether your daddy was here or not." Nurse Sullivan returned to check on us, bringing fresh ice water and pain medication. "How are you feeling, Mama?" she asked, adjusting Emmett's brinket with practiced care. "Tired, but good, really good, actually." The admission surprised me. I should have been devastated, heartbroken, angry. Instead, I felt oddly empowered. "That's the endorphins," she said with a knowing smile. "Your body just accomplished something incredible, and doing it without support makes it even more impressive." "You think so?" "Honey, I've been delivering babies for 15 years. I've seen women with a whole army of supporters fall apart, and I've seen women like you dig deep and find strength they never knew they had." She paused, checking Emmett's vital signs. "Your little boy was born to a warrior mama." A warrior mama. The phrase resonated with something deep in my chest. I'd always seen myself as someone who needed taking care of, someone who relied on others for strength and security. But I'd just endured 8 hours of labor, made medical decisions, and brought a human being into the world with only my friend's support. Maybe I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. Around 7 o'clock, my phone rang. Gary's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, my heart jumped with the old hope that he'd realized what he'd missed, that he was calling with frantic apologies and declarations of love. "How are you feeling?" he asked when I answered. His voice carried the casual tone of someone checking on a minor inconvenience. "I'm fine," I said quietly, looking down at Emmett. "Good. The deposition went really well. I think we might actually win this thing. Are you still having contractions?" Still having contractions. It was nearly 12 hours since I'd first called him, 6 hours since I'd left increasingly desperate voicemails, and he thought I was still in early labor. No, Gary, I'm not having contractions anymore. Oh, good. False alarm then? I figured it was too early. First babies are usually late anyway. The disconnect was staggering. While I'd been pushing our son into the world, Gary had been celebrating a legal victory and assuming my labor was a false alarm. Gary, what time is it? About 7. Why? Where have you been since this morning? I told you, the deposition, then I had to prep for tomorrow's hearing. Why are you asking weird questions? Are you feeling okay? I closed my eyes, feeling the last vestiges of hope drain away. He genuinely had no idea. He'd been so disconnected from my pregnancy, so absent from the reality of impending parenthood, that he couldn't even conceive that our baby might actually be born. I'm at the hospital, Gary. I know. You said you were going to get checked out. Did they send you home? No, I had the baby. Silence stretched across the phone line. Long, empty silence that spoke volumes about how completely he'd checked out of our lives. What do you mean you had the baby? I mean, Emmett was born at 3:27 this afternoon. He's 6 pounds, 8 ounces, and he's perfect. More silence. When Gary finally spoke, his voice was different, higher, shakier. That's not possible. First babies take forever. Everyone says that. Everyone was wrong. But I wasn't there. The understatement of the century. No, Gary, you weren't there. Celine, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known? You did know. I called you 6 times. I left voicemails telling you exactly what was happening. You chose not to answer. My phone was on silent for the deposition. I didn't see. For 12 hours? Your phone was on silent for 12 hours? I could hear him moving around, probably pacing his office, trying to process what I was telling him. I'll come right now. I'll leave right this minute. Don't. The word came out sharper than I'd intended, but I meant it. The thought of Gary bursting into our quiet hospital room with his panic and guilt and excuses made me feel protective of the peace Emmett and I had found. Don't? What do you mean, don't? I mean, we're fine. We handled it without you. We don't need you to show up now for damage control. But he's my son, too. Is he? Because sons need fathers who care enough to answer the phone when they're being born. Sons need fathers who prioritize their existence over billable hours. Gary's voice cracked. Celine, please, let me come meet him. Let me fix this. Fix this? As if missing your child's birth was something that could be repaired with the right words or gestures? There's nothing to fix, Gary. There's just the truth of who you are and what matters to you. I hung up before he could respond, then turned off my phone entirely. Whatever crisis of conscience he was experiencing in his office, whatever guilt or panic or regret, it wasn't my responsibility to manage anymore. Emmett stirred in my arms, making the soft, snuffling sounds newborns make when they're dreaming. His tiny hand found my finger and gripped it with surprising strength. It's okay, little one, I murmured. Mama's got you. And I'm never going to let anyone make you feel like you're not important enough to show up for. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Not because Gary approved or disappeared, not because his family accepted or rejected me, but because I was Emmett's mother, and that was the most important job I'd ever have. The woman who'd spent 9 months making excuses for Gary's behavior was gone, replaced by someone who recognized her own worth and refused to accept anything less than she deserved. It had taken giving birth alone to discover that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. And somehow, that felt like the greatest gift Emmett could have given me. At 9:30 that evening, as I was attempting to nurse Emmett for the second time, Nurse Sullivan entered my room with an expression I couldn't quite read. Behind her walked a young woman who couldn't have been older than 20, wearing scrubs and carrying a small bundle. Celine, I'm sorry to disturb you, Nurse Sullivan said quietly, but I wanted you to meet Caroline Patterson. She's a nursing student doing her rotation in our maternity ward, and she just delivered her first baby about an hour ago. The young woman stepped forward hesitantly. She was pale, exhausted, with the same slightly shell-shocked expression I probably wore. But what made me freeze completely was the baby in her arms. The infant had the same distinctive green eyes with golden flecks as Emmett. Not similar, identical. The exact same unusual eye color that had marked every Montgomery I'd ever met. Gary's eyes, his mother's eyes, and now, apparently, this stranger's baby's eyes. Congratulations, I managed to say, though my voice sounded hollow to my own ears. Thank you, Caroline replied softly. Nurse Sullivan said you delivered alone too. I thought maybe we could support each other, first-time moms and all. Alone? She'd delivered alone as well? My heart began racing with a suspicion so terrible I didn't want to voice it. What's your baby's name? I asked, studying the infant's face with growing alarm. Lily Patterson. Caroline's voice was thick with exhaustion and something else. Disappointment, maybe? Or heartbreak. That's beautiful. And the father? Caroline's expression crumpled slightly. He promised he'd be here, but his wife went into labor the same day, and he said he had to be with her instead. She looked down at Lily with infinite tenderness. I understand, I guess. She's his wife. I'm just what? The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Caroline, I said carefully, my hands beginning to shake. What does the father look like? She glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone might overhear. He's tall, dark hair, green eyes like Lily's. He's a lawyer downtown, very successful, very married. Her voice turned bitter on the last words. The room began to spin. I clutched Emmett tighter, feeling sick to my stomach. What's his name? I probably shouldn't say. He made me promise not to tell anyone about us. She looked at me with desperate eyes. But God, I'm so tired of carrying this secret alone. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and scrolled to a photo of Gary from our last anniversary dinner, the one where he'd seemed distracted and checked his phone constantly, the one where I'd thought he was just stressed about work. Is this him? Caroline's face went white. She stared at the photo, then at me, then back at the photo. Who are you? I'm his wife. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Caroline's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into the visitor's chair, still holding Lily. Oh, God, you're Celine. Her voice was barely a whisper. He talks about you sometimes, says you don't understand him. Don't understand him. The classic excuse of cheating husbands everywhere. How long? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. 8 months. We met when he came to the university for a guest lecture in my pre-law class. Caroline's tears were flowing freely now. He said his marriage was basically over, that you were just going through the motions. He said you'd been trying to trap him with a baby he didn't want. The lies were breathtaking in their audacity. While I'd been desperately trying to reconnect with my increasingly distant husband, he'd been building a relationship with a college student young enough to be his daughter. When did you find out you were pregnant? December, right around Christmas. Caroline wiped her eyes with her free hand. I was so scared to tell him, but he seemed happy about it. Said it might be the push he needed to finally leave you. December. The same month Gary had started working late every night. The same month he'd forgotten our anniversary. The same month he'd told his mother I was being too dramatic about the pregnancy. But then you got pregnant too, Caroline continued, her voice hollow. And everything changed. He said he couldn't leave you while you were carrying his child, that it would look too bad for his career. His career. Always his career. So he kept us both, I said flatly. Two pregnant women, neither of us knowing about the other. Caroline nodded miserably. He said after your baby was born, he'd figure out how to handle everything. But when I went into labor today and called him, he said he couldn't come because you were in labor too, and he had to maintain appearances. Maintain appearances. While both his children were being born, Gary was maintaining appearances. Not supporting either of the women carrying his children, just managing his image. But he never showed up for you either, Caroline said, studying my face. Did he? He never showed up for me either, I confirmed. The magnitude of Gary's betrayal was staggering. He hadn't just abandoned me during labor, he'd abandoned both of us. Two women, two babies, both left to face the most vulnerable moment of our lives alone, while he did whatever the hell he'd been doing all day. I'm so sorry, Caroline whispered. I never would have if I'd known you were actually pregnant, if I'd known he was lying about your marriage. You were 20 years old. He's a 35-year-old lawyer who targeted a student. My anger wasn't for her. It was for the man who'd manipulated both of us. This isn't your fault. We sat in silence for several minutes, two women who'd been played by the same man, holding babies who shared their father's distinctive eyes. The irony was cruel. Gary had missed the birth of both his children to avoid dealing with the consequences of his own choices. What are you going to do? Caroline asked finally. I don't know yet, but I know I won't be making excuses for him anymore. I looked down at Emmett, sleeping peacefully in my arms. What about you? I hoped he'd choose us, that seeing Lily would make him realize what he wanted. She laughed bitterly. Pretty stupid, right? Thinking a man who'd cheat on his pregnant wife would suddenly become someone honorable. Not stupid, hopeful. There's a difference. Caroline stood slowly, adjusting Lily's blanket. I should go, let you rest. Caroline. She paused at the door. You deserve better than being someone's secret. You and Lily both deserve better. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. So do you and Emmett. After she left, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, processing what I'd learned. Gary hadn't just been emotionally absent during my pregnancy, he'd been actively building a second family. The missed appointments, the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the way he'd flinched when I tried to touch him, it all made terrible sense now. But more than that, I realized Gary had shown his true character today. Faced with the births of both his children, he'd chosen neither. He'd abandoned both families he'd created, leaving two young mothers to face labor alone while he did God knows what. That told me everything I needed to know about the man I'd married and the father he'd be to Emmett. It was time to stop hoping Gary would change and start planning a future without him. The next morning brought more revelations that shattered what remained of my illusions about Gary. Harriet arrived early with coffee and pastries, taking one look at my face and immediately sitting down with concern. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. I told her about Caroline, about Lily, about the 8-month affair that had run parallel to my entire pregnancy. Harriet's expression grew darker with each detail. That bastard, she said when I finished. That absolute bastard. There's more. I pulled out my phone and showed her the text messages I'd discovered when I finally turned it back on. Gary had sent 17 messages since our phone call, each more desperate than the last. I can explain everything, Harriet read aloud. It's not what you think. We need to talk about our future. Jesus, Celine, he's still lying to you even now. But it was the voicemail from Caroline, left at 3 a.m., that revealed the full scope of Gary's deception. Her voice was shaky, exhausted, but determined. Celine, it's Caroline. I couldn't sleep, and I kept thinking about everything. There are things you need to know, things Gary made me promise never to tell anyone. But after meeting you, after seeing what he did to both of us, you deserve the truth. She went on to detail a web of manipulation that went far beyond a simple affair. Gary had convinced her to take out student loans to pay for an apartment he could visit. He'd had her sign a non-disclosure agreement to protect his career, ensuring she could never speak publicly about their relationship. When she'd gotten pregnant, he'd pressured her to consider abortion, then made her promise to handle everything quietly when she refused. He said if anyone found out about us, it would ruin his chances of making partner, Caroline's voice continued. He said you were vindictive and would try to destroy him financially if you discovered the affair. He made me believe I was protecting him from you. Vindictive. Gary had painted me as the villain in his story, the unreasonable wife who would punish him for finding real love with a younger woman. But yesterday changed everything, Caroline went on. When he abandoned both of us, when he couldn't even show up for either of his children being born, I realized he was never going to choose anyone but himself. And I found something in his briefcase when he left it in my apartment last week. My hands trembled as I continued listening. There are legal documents, Celine, divorce papers already drawn up, dated for next month. He's been planning to leave you right after the baby was born. But not for me. There are financial projections showing how he could minimize child support and alimony if he filed immediately after birth, before you could establish a lifestyle of dependency. Those were his exact words in the notes. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Gary had been planning our divorce before Emmett was even born, strategizing how to abandon his family while minimizing financial consequences. The affair with Caroline wasn't about love. It was about having somewhere to go when he executed his exit strategy. Harriet picked up the phone and continued listening, her face growing pale. There's more. He has a whole file about you, your work schedule, your salary, even photos documenting your pregnancy symptoms. His notes say he's been building a case that you're emotionally unstable and unfit for primary custody. He wants to take Emmett, Celine, not because he loves him, but because it would reduce his child support obligations. The room started spinning. Gary hadn't just abandoned me during labor, he'd been systematically building a case to take my son away from me. Every dismissive comment about my emotions, every time he'd called me dramatic or unstable, he'd been laying groundwork for a custody battle. I'm so sorry, Caroline's message concluded. I should have told you months ago, but I was scared and stupid, and I believed his lies about you. I've made copies of everything, and I want to help however I can. What he did to both of us is unforgivable. I sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of Gary's betrayal. This wasn't just infidelity or emotional abandonment. This was a calculated campaign to destroy my life while positioning himself as the victim. Celine, Harriet's voice was gentle but firm. You need to call a lawyer, today, before he has a chance to execute whatever plan he's been working on. She was right. The Gary I'd married, the man who'd spun me around with joy at our pregnancy news, had never existed. In his place was someone who'd spent months manipulating two women, planning to abandon his family, and building a legal strategy to steal my child. The war had already begun. I just hadn't known I was fighting it. But now I did. And I had ammunition Gary never expected me to have. The truth about his character, documented evidence of his deception, and an unlikely ally in Caroline Patterson. Gary had made one crucial mistake in his careful planning. He'd underestimated both of the women he'd betrayed, assuming we'd remain isolated and ashamed rather than finding strength and shared truth. He was about to discover just how wrong he'd been. By noon, I had an appointment with Rebecca Garrett, one of Portland's most respected family law attorneys. Harriet had called in favors to get me seen immediately, and Caroline had agreed to meet us there with copies of all the documents she'd found. I've seen cases like this before, Attorney Garrett said after reviewing Caroline's evidence. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that made me understand why Gary's colleagues feared her in court. Your husband has been very methodical, but he's also made some crucial errors. She spread the documents across her conference table like a general planning battle strategy. Gary's handwritten notes about my emotional instability sat next to financial projections showing how he could minimize support payments. His prenup with Caroline looked official until you realized it had no legal standing since he was still married to me. First, the good news, Attorney Garrett continued. His abandonment during labor, combined with the affair and the premeditated divorce planning, gives us substantial grounds for fault-based divorce in Oregon. We can argue that his conduct makes him unfit for primary custody. Caroline shifted nervously in her chair, still processing her role in all this. Will I have to testify against him? Probably. Your testimony about his manipulation, the financial coercion, and his abandonment of both children will be crucial. Attorney Garrett's voice was kind but firm. I know it's difficult, but he's counting on your silence to protect him. What about his claims that I'm unstable? I asked, the words still stinging. Attorney Garrett smiled grimly. Actually, that's where he's made his biggest mistake. Look at this. She pulled out Gary's own notes. He's documented your pregnancy symptoms as evidence of instability. Morning sickness, fatigue, emotional reactions to his absence, all normal pregnancy experiences he's tried to pathologize. She flipped to another page. But here's what's interesting. He's also documented every missed appointment, every late night at work, every time he dismissed your concerns. He's essentially created a record of his own abandonment while trying to build a case against you. Caroline leaned forward. There's more. He made me keep a journal of our relationship, said it was romantic, but it shows the timeline of his lies to both of us. Every time he told Celine he was working late, every time he told me his marriage was over, it's all documented. The irony was perfect. Gary's obsession with controlling the narrative had led him to document his own misconduct. What about finances? I asked. Can he really leave me with nothing? Not in Oregon. We have equitable distribution laws, and abandoning your spouse during childbirth doesn't look good to judges. Attorney Garrett pulled out another folder. Plus, Caroline found something very interesting in his papers. She handed me a document I'd never seen before, a life insurance policy on me, taken out 6 months ago, with Gary as the sole beneficiary. My blood ran cold. I never signed this. No, but your signature is on it. A very good forgery, but still a forgery. Attorney Garrett's voice was deadly serious. Combined with his financial projections and his plan to claim you're unstable, this raises some very disturbing questions about his long-term intentions. Caroline gasped. You don't think he would actually... I think your husband is capable of anything that serves his interests, Attorney Garrett said bluntly. But now that we know about it, he's lost the element of surprise. She outlined our strategy: file for divorce immediately, seek emergency custody orders based on abandonment, and document everything Gary had done. Caroline would provide testimony about the affair and financial manipulation. The forged insurance policy would be reported to authorities. He's going to fight back hard, she warned. Men like Gary don't give up control easily. Expect him to escalate, love bombing, threats, attempts to isolate you from support systems. He might even try to use your postpartum recovery against you. I'm ready, I said. The woman who'd made excuses for Gary's behavior was gone. In her place was a mother who would do anything to protect her child. There's one more thing, Caroline said quietly. Gary doesn't know I found those documents. He thinks I'm still under his control, still willing to keep his secrets. We could use that. Attorney Garrett's eyes lit up with predatory interest. What are you thinking? He's supposed to come see me in Lily tonight. He texted this morning asking if I was ready to handle this situation quietly. He doesn't know I've talked to Celine. You want to wear a wire, I realized. Caroline nodded. If he's going to try to manipulate me into staying silent, or if he admits to anything about his plans, wouldn't that help? Attorney Garrett was already reaching for her phone. I know an investigator who can set that up. If Gary incriminates himself, we'll have everything we need to destroy his credibility permanently. As we finalized the plan, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. For months, I'd been reacting to Gary's manipulations, trying to save a marriage that had never really existed. Now, finally, I was taking control. Gary had spent our entire relationship underestimating me, treating me like a naive obstacle to be managed rather than an intelligent woman capable of fighting back. His careful plans had depended on my continued silence and isolation. He was about to learn that his biggest mistake wasn't getting caught, it was assuming I'd stay broken. That evening, Caroline sat in her small apartment with a recording device hidden beneath her nursing scrubs, waiting for Gary to arrive. I was at Harriet's house with Emmett, listening to the live feed through earbuds while my son slept peacefully in my arms. Gary knocked at exactly 7 o'clock, punctual as always when it served his purposes. "Caroline, sweetheart," his voice came through crystal clear. "How are you feeling? How's our little girl?" Our little girl. The possessiveness in his tone made my skin crawl, especially knowing he'd said the same words about our son just days ago. "I'm tired, Gary, and confused." Caroline's voice wavered perfectly, not the wavering of someone who was acting, but of someone genuinely processing betrayal. "You said you'd be here when Lily was born." "I know, and I'm so sorry, but Celine went into labor the same day, and I had to maintain appearances until I can file for divorce. You understand, right? We talked about this." File for divorce. There it was, his plan laid out casually, as if abandoning 2 women in labor was just another strategic move. "Did we talk about this, Gary? Because I remember you saying you'd choose me and Lily over everything else." "I am choosing you. That's why I'm here now instead of at home with her." His voice took on that patronizing tone I knew so well. "Caroline, you have to trust me. I've been planning this for months. Once the divorce is finalized, we can be together properly." "What about child support? For both babies?" A pause. I could practically hear Gary calculating his response. "We'll figure that out. Celine won't get much. I've been documenting her instability throughout the pregnancy. And you? Well, we'll work something out that's fair for everyone." Fair for everyone. "Gary, I need to ask you something directly." Caroline's voice grew stronger. "Do you love me, or am I just convenient?" "What kind of question is that? Of course I love you." "Then why did you have me sign that non-disclosure agreement? Why did you make me get a separate apartment with student loan money? Why haven't you introduced me to any of your friends or family?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Caroline, you're being emotional. Pregnancy hormones can make women irrational." "Don't." Her voice cut through his condescension like a blade. "Don't you dare tell me I'm being irrational for asking legitimate questions." "Look, sweetheart, I understand you're scared. Having a baby is overwhelming, but you need to trust that I know what I'm doing. I've been handling Celine for 2 years. I know how to manage difficult women." Manage difficult women? As if we were problems to be solved rather than human beings deserving of respect. "Is that what you've been doing with me? Managing me?" "Caroline, you're twisting my words. I'm trying to protect all of us. You, me, Lily, even Celine and her baby. If this comes out wrong, it could destroy my career, and then where would any of us be?" His career. Always his career. "Gary, I met her. I met Celine." The silence that followed was so complete I thought the recording had cut out. "What did you just say?" "I met your wife. At the hospital. We were in recovery at the same time." Caroline's voice remained steady, but I could hear her heart pounding through the microphone. "She's not the vindictive, unstable woman you described. She's just a woman who was abandoned by her husband during the most vulnerable moment of her life." "Caroline, whatever she told you." "She didn't have to tell me anything, Gary. I saw it all myself. She delivered alone, just like me. You abandoned both of us. I had important business to handle, legal emergencies that—" "Stop lying." Caroline's voice cracked with emotion. "Just stop lying for once in your life. There was no emergency. There was no crisis that required you to abandon both your children being born. You just couldn't face the consequences of your own choices." Gary's voice changed, becoming cold and threatening in a way that made me grip Emmett tighter. "Caroline, you need to be very careful about what you say next. That NDA you signed isn't just a piece of paper. It has real legal consequences. If you've been talking to Celine, if you've been sharing private information about our relationship, you could face serious financial liability." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm reminding you of your legal obligations, and I'm telling you that Celine is not your friend. She's a woman scorned who will say anything to turn you against me. Don't let her manipulate you." The projection was breathtaking. Gary was accusing me of the exact manipulation he'd been practicing for months. She's not manipulating me, Gary. She's showing me the truth. We compared timelines. Every night you told her you were working late. Every weekend you said you had client emergencies. You were with me. And every time you told me your marriage was over, you were going home to sleep next to her. Caroline, I know about the divorce papers, the ones dated for next month. I know about the financial projections showing how you could minimize child support. I know about the life insurance policy you forged her signature on. The silence stretched so long, I wondered if Gary had left. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. How do you know about any of that? Because I'm not as stupid as you think I am, and neither is she. Caroline, you have no idea what you're playing with. If you think you can blackmail me, I'm not blackmailing you, Gary. I'm done with you, completely done, and so is Celine. You can't be done with me. You're carrying my child. You're financially dependent on me. You have no legal standing, no family support, no way to take care of a baby alone. The mask was completely off now. No more sweet words or false promises, just the cold calculation of a man who saw people as assets to be controlled. Watch me, Caroline said simply. Watch me take care of my daughter just fine without you. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the recording, followed by Caroline's shaky breathing. Did you get all that? She whispered. Every word, I said into the phone. Caroline, you were incredible. I can't believe I ever thought he loved me. He doesn't love anyone but himself, but now we have everything we need to make sure he can never hurt either of us again. The next morning, Gary arrived at our townhouse unannounced. I watched through the window as he sat in his car for several minutes, probably rehearsing whatever manipulation he'd planned. When he finally knocked, I was ready. Celine, we need to talk. He looked terrible, unshaven, rumpled, his usual polished appearance completely gone. I know you're angry, but we can work through this. Can we? I stepped aside to let him in, noting how his eyes immediately searched for Emmett. Where would you like to start? The affair? The abandonment? Or the forged life insurance policy? Gary's face went white. The what? I'd prepared for this moment, arranging all the evidence on our dining room table like Attorney Garrett had shown me. The divorce papers he'd had drawn up, the financial calculations, the notes about my supposed instability, and Caroline's journal documenting their relationship timeline. And the centerpiece? The life insurance policy with my forged signature. Sit down, Gary. He remained standing, his lawyer instincts probably telling him not to make himself vulnerable. But his eyes kept darting to the documents, trying to assess how much I knew. I don't know what Caroline told you, but Caroline didn't tell me anything I couldn't verify myself. I picked up his handwritten notes, like this detailed analysis of my pregnancy symptoms as evidence of mental instability, or this financial projection showing how you could minimize child support by filing for divorce immediately after birth. Gary reached for the papers, but I pulled them back. These are private legal documents. You have no right. I have every right to know when my husband is planning to destroy my life. I held up the insurance policy. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you'd taken out $1 million policy on me? That's just good financial planning. All married couples should have life insurance. With forged signatures? Gary's composure finally cracked. He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. The gesture I'd once found endearing now just looked pathetic. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. Explain how planning my divorce before our son was born isn't exactly what it looks like. Explain how documenting my pregnancy symptoms as mental illness isn't building a custody case against me. I was protecting myself. From what? From your pregnant wife who loved you? From a situation I never wanted. The mask slipped completely. I never wanted kids, Celine. I never wanted the responsibility, the financial burden, the way they change everything. When you got pregnant, I felt trapped. So you decided to trap someone else instead? Gary's jaw tightened. Caroline was different. She was young, flexible, willing to adapt to my life instead of demanding I change mine. She was 20 years old, Gary. You manipulated a college student into taking on debt to fund your affair, then abandoned her when she needed you most. She knew what she was getting into. Did she? Because the recording from last night suggests otherwise. Gary went completely still. What recording? I pulled out my phone and played back his voice. I've been handling Celine for 2 years. I know how to manage difficult women. His face cycled through shock, rage, and calculation in rapid succession. That recording is illegal. Oregon is a two-party consent state. Actually, it's not. Caroline consented to record her own conversation in her own apartment. And the content is quite illuminating. I played another section. Celine won't get much. I've been documenting her instability throughout the pregnancy. Gary lunged for my phone, but I was faster, stepping back and clutching it protectively. Give me that phone, Celine. Or what? You'll add assault to your list of legal problems? He stopped, seemingly realizing how his actions looked. Those recordings are taken out of context. What context makes abandoning 2 women in labor acceptable? I had important business. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop lying. Caroline and I compared timelines. We know exactly where you were yesterday, at your office, celebrating winning a deposition while both your children were being born. Gary slumped back in his chair, finally understanding the scope of what I knew. What do you want, Celine? I want you to leave. I want you to take your manipulation, your lies, and your forged documents and get out of my house. This is my house, too. Actually, it's not. I handed him another document, one he hadn't seen before. I had our mortgage documents reviewed. The house is in my name only, purchased with money from my father's estate before we were married. You never had any legal claim to it. The lie I'd been told about our joint ownership was just one more way Gary had tried to control me, making me believe I was financially dependent when I wasn't. You can't keep my son from me. I'm not keeping him from you. You're keeping yourself from him by choosing your career over his existence. I looked him directly in the eyes. Emmett deserves a father who shows up, Gary. If you ever decide to become that man, we can discuss visitation. Until then, any communication goes through my attorney. Gary stood, his professional composure returning as he realized the conversation was over. This isn't finished, Celine. I'll fight for custody. I'll prove you're unfit. With what evidence? Your own notes documenting your abandonment? The recording of you admitting you never wanted children? The forged insurance policy? I smiled calmly. Please, Gary, take me to court. I'd love for a judge to hear everything you've said and done. He stared at me for a long moment, probably seeing clearly for the first time the woman he'd underestimated for 2 years. You've changed. No, I said quietly. I've just stopped pretending your behavior was acceptable. Gary gathered what remained of his dignity and walked toward the door. As his hand reached the knob, he turned back one last time. You'll regret this. Without me, you're nothing. I looked down at Emmett, sleeping peacefully in his carrier, then back at the man who'd missed his birth for a basketball game that never existed. Without you, I said, I'm everything I was always meant to be. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and devastating for Gary. Within a week, Attorney Garrett had filed for emergency custody based on abandonment, submitted the forged insurance policy to the district attorney's office, and obtained a restraining order preventing Gary from contacting Caroline or interfering with her nursing program. Gary's law firm, Sullivan & Associates, moved quickly to distance themselves from the scandal. Alex Sumner himself called to inform me that Gary had been placed on administrative leave pending an ethics investigation. We take allegations of document forgery very seriously, Alex said during our brief phone conversation. The firm's reputation depends on the integrity of our partners and associates. The irony wasn't lost on me. Gary had spent months worried about his personal life might affect his career, only to have his professional ambitions destroyed by his own documented misconduct. Caroline called me 3 days after Gary's departure to share the latest developments. My student advisor wants to file a Title IX complaint, she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard since we met. Apparently, Gary's guest lecture wasn't officially sanctioned, and using university events to target students for inappropriate relationships violates multiple policies. Are you going to file it? I think I have to. If he did this to me, he might do it to other students. She paused. My advisor says there might be financial aid available for victims of faculty misconduct. I could finish my nursing degree without the debt he made me take on. The university investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, Gary was banned from all campus events and guest speaking opportunities. His carefully cultivated image as a successful attorney who mentored young people was completely shattered. But the most satisfying consequence came from an unexpected source: Gary's own mother. Caroline Montgomery called me on a Friday evening, her voice tight with controlled fury. Celine, I owe you an enormous apology. You don't need to apologize for Gary's choices. I do, actually. I knew something was wrong during my visit. I knew my son was treating you poorly, and I chose to mind my own business instead of protecting you. Her voice cracked slightly. I failed you and my grandson. She'd learned about the affair, the abandonment, and the legal manipulations through the family grapevine. Gary's sister, Tanya, had apparently been horrified to discover the truth and shared everything with their mother. I've cut off all financial support, Caroline continued. The condo I helped him buy, the car payments I was covering, the country club membership, all of it's gone. And I've changed my will. Everything that would have gone to Gary will now go into a trust for Emmett. The financial implications were staggering. Gary's lifestyle had been partially subsidized by his mother's wealth, and now he'd have to maintain his expensive habits on just his salary, assuming he still had a job after the ethics investigation concluded. I want to be part of Emmett's life, Caroline said quietly. I know I don't deserve it after how I failed you, but I'd like to try to be the grandmother he deserves. He needs family who show up, I said, echoing the words I'd spoken to Gary. If you can be that person, we can start there. Caroline's first visit was tentative, careful. She arrived with practical gifts, diapers, formula, baby clothes, and the next size up. But what moved me most was watching her hold Emmett for the first time. He has Gary's eyes, she said softly, but I hope he has your heart. He'll have whatever heart he chooses to develop. That's not genetics, that's character. Caroline nodded, tears streaming down her face. I raised Gary to be better than this. I thought I had, but somewhere along the way, he learned to see people as things to be managed instead of humans to be loved. The contrast between Caroline's accountability and Gary's deflection was stark. She'd made mistakes, but she owned them and worked to repair the damage. Gary continued to blame everyone else for the consequences of his own choices. His attempts at legal retaliation were pathetic and short-lived. The custody petition he filed was dismissed when the judge reviewed the evidence of abandonment. His attempt to challenge the recording was thrown out based on Oregon's single-party consent laws. Even his claim that I'd stolen his private documents fell apart when Caroline testified about finding them in her apartment. Mr. Montgomery, Judge Patterson said during our final custody hearing, your own documentation shows a pattern of emotional abandonment, financial manipulation, and deliberate deception. The court finds no evidence supporting your fitness for primary custody. Gary was granted supervised visitation every other weekend, contingent on completing parenting classes and anger management counseling. He attended exactly 2 sessions before stopping completely. I don't have time for this therapeutic nonsense, he told his court-appointed supervisor. I'm a lawyer, not a criminal. His visitations ended by mutual agreement. Emmett deserved consistency and emotional safety, not a father who saw court-mandated time with his son as an inconvenience to be endured. The final blow came 6 months later when the Oregon State Bar suspended Gary's license pending the outcome of multiple investigations. The forged insurance policy, the manipulative NDAs, the financial coercion of a college student, it all added up to a pattern of professional misconduct that made him unsuitable to practice law. Caroline and I were having coffee when we learned about the suspension. She showed me the official notification on her phone, shaking her head with a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. He built his entire identity around being a successful attorney, she said. Now what is he? Now he's just a man who has to live with the consequences of his choices. I felt no joy in Gary's downfall, but I felt profound relief in the safety it created for Emmett and me. The man who'd planned to destroy my life was now struggling to rebuild his own, while his son grew up surrounded by people who actually showed up when they were needed. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. And for the first time in years, Emmett and I were truly protected. A year later, I received an unexpected phone call that brought everything full circle. It was from Detective Cole Haven with the Portland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Ms. Montgomery, we've completed our investigation into the forged insurance policy. I wanted to let you know that charges have been filed. Gary was facing 3 felony counts: forgery, identity theft, and insurance fraud. The detective explained that the insurance company had cooperated fully, providing handwriting analysis that confirmed the signature forgery and records showing Gary had attempted to change the beneficiary information multiple times during my pregnancy. The most troubling aspect, Detective Haven continued, is the timing. He took out the policy right after your first ultrasound, then repeatedly increased the coverage amount as your pregnancy progressed. Combined with his documented plans to claim you were mentally unstable, it suggests premeditation for a very serious crime. The words sent chills down my spine, but also brought a strange sense of validation. Every instinct I'd had about Gary's true nature had been correct. The woman who'd made excuses for his behavior might not have survived what he'd been planning. What happens now? The district attorney is confident about the case. With your testimony, Caroline Patterson's evidence, and the digital trail he left behind, we expect a plea agreement or conviction. Either way, he's looking at significant prison time. That evening, Caroline Patterson came over for dinner, a tradition we'd established as single mothers supporting each other. Our children, now walking and babbling, played together with the natural ease of siblings who shared a complicated father but loving, present mothers. I heard about the charges, she said as we watched Emmett and Lily stack blocks together. Are you okay with testifying if it goes to trial? I'm ready. I've been ready since the night I recorded him. Caroline's voice was steady, confident in a way that would have been impossible a year ago. He needs to face consequences for what he planned to do to you. And to you. You were a victim too. We both were, but look at us now. She was right. Caroline had finished her nursing program with honors and landed a position in the same hospital where both our children were born. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She now helped other women through the vulnerable moments Gary had abandoned us during. I'd been promoted to senior curator at the gallery, leading exhibitions that drew national attention. The confidence I'd gained from surviving Gary's betrayal translated into professional success I'd never imagined possible. Most importantly, both our children were thriving in environments filled with genuine love and support rather than the manipulation and control Gary would have brought to their lives. The final validation came from an unexpected source. Judge Patterson, who'd presided over our custody hearing, requested a meeting 6 months after Gary's criminal trial resulted in a conviction and 2-year prison sentence. I wanted you to know, she said during our brief conversation, that your case has influenced how I evaluate abandonment claims in family court. The documentation you provided showed a level of calculated emotional abuse that many people don't recognize as criminal behavior. She explained that she'd started requiring more comprehensive evidence in custody cases, particularly when one parent claimed the other was unstable. Too often, we see manipulation disguised as concern. Your willingness to fight back, to document everything and hold him accountable, has helped protect other families facing similar situations. Our story had become part of something larger, a recognition that abandonment during childbirth wasn't just cruel, it was often part of a pattern of abuse that endangered both mothers and children. Standing in my kitchen that evening, watching Emmett take his first independent steps while Lily clapped encouragement, I realized that Gary's abandonment had ultimately been a gift. It forced me to discover my own strength, to build a support system based on genuine care rather than obligation, and to create the kind of family environment I wanted my son to grow up in. The baby in the next bed had indeed shared my son's eyes, but more importantly, she'd shared his future. One where they'd both be raised by mothers who'd learned that their worth wasn't determined by anyone else's ability to recognize it. 2 years after that devastating day in the hospital, I stood in my new home office, reviewing applications for an art therapy program I'd developed for single mothers. The program had grown from a small grant proposal into a nonprofit organization that served women throughout Oregon. "Mama, look!" Emmett called from the living room, where he was building an elaborate tower with his blocks. At 2 years old, he was confident, curious, and completely secure in the knowledge that he was loved unconditionally. The contrast with my own childhood couldn't have been starker. I'd grown up believing that love was conditional, something that had to be earned through perfect behavior and constant accommodation of others' needs. Emmett was growing up knowing that love was his birthright, that his worth didn't depend on anyone else's ability to see it. Carolyn Patterson had become more than just an ally. She was family in the truest sense. Our children considered each other siblings, spending weekends together while we supported each other through the challenges of single motherhood. Last month, she'd been promoted to charge nurse in the maternity ward, where she'd started a support group for women who'd experienced abandonment during childbirth. "You'd be amazed how common it is," she told me during one of our weekly dinners. "Not always as extreme as what Gary did to us, but emotional abandonment during pregnancy is more widespread than people realize." Her work was healing for both herself and the women she served. Sometimes the best way to process trauma was to help others navigate similar experiences. My own healing had taken a different path. The gallery work that had once been just a job had become a passion project. I specialized now in exhibitions featuring female artists who'd overcome adversity, women who'd found their voices after being silenced, who'd discovered their strength after being told they were weak. The latest exhibition, Resilient Voices, had drawn visitors from across the country. The centerpiece was a series of paintings by a woman who'd started creating art at age 50 after leaving an abusive marriage. Her work was raw, powerful, and utterly honest about the journey from victim to survivor. "Art saved my life," she'd told me during the opening reception. "It gave me a language for experiences I didn't have words for." I understood that sentiment completely. My own story had given me a language for recognizing manipulation, for understanding the difference between love and control, for teaching my son the value of authentic relationships over transactional ones. Gary's name rarely came up in our daily lives anymore. He'd served his prison sentence and disappeared into whatever new life he'd built for himself. According to his mother, Caroline, he'd moved to another state and was working in some non-legal capacity, still claiming that everyone else was responsible for his downfall. His absence was a gift to Emmett, who was growing up surrounded by people who showed up consistently. His grandmother, Caroline, his aunt Caroline Patterson, his sister Lily, his mother, who'd learned to trust her own instincts about what love actually looked like. The program I'd developed served women in various stages of leaving toxic relationships or recovering from abandonment. We provided childcare during sessions, practical support like job interview coaching, and most importantly, a community of women who understood that starting over wasn't failure, it was courage. "The hardest part," one participant had shared during group, "is believing I deserve better." "You do deserve better," I'd responded, the words carrying the weight of my own hard-won wisdom. "And more importantly, your children deserve to see what a healthy relationship looks like, even if it's just your relationship with yourself." That evening, as I tucked Emmett into bed, he looked up at me with those distinctive green eyes that had once represented pain, but now symbolized possibility. "Tell me the story about when I was born," he requested, as he had countless times before. "Once upon a time," I began, "there was a very brave little boy who couldn't wait to meet his mama, and when he was born, he brought with him the most precious gift. He showed his mama how strong she really was." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the truth that mattered for a 2-year-old. Someday, when he was older, I'd tell him the complete story. But I'd tell it as a story of triumph, not tragedy. The story of how his birth marked the beginning of both our real lives. 5 years have passed since that March day when I delivered Emmett alone in a hospital room, abandoned by the man I thought would be my partner for life. Today, I can barely recognize the woman I was then, the one who made excuses for cruelty, who accepted emotional scraps and called them love, who believed her worth was determined by someone else's willingness to acknowledge it. Emmett is now 7, a bright, empathetic boy who's never known a world where love comes with conditions or manipulation disguised as care. He has friends whose parents are divorced, remarried, or single, and to him, family simply means the people who show up consistently with genuine affection. His definition of normal includes strong women who take care of themselves and their children, who make decisions based on their own judgment rather than fear of someone else's disapproval. Last month, he asked me directly about his father for the first time since our bedtime stories. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy like Tommy does?" I'd been preparing for this conversation for years, but it still took my breath away. You do have a father, sweetheart, but not all fathers are ready to be good parents. Your father wasn't ready to love us the way we deserved to be loved. Is that why he didn't come when I was born? The question was so direct, so innocent, that I felt tears spring to my eyes. Yes, that's exactly why. But you came, and Grandma Caroline comes, and Aunt Caroline and Lily come. That's right, and we always will. He nodded solemnly, processing this information with the remarkable acceptance children have for their reality. I think having people who come is better than having people who don't. Out of the mouths of babes. Caroline Patterson and I often marvel at how our children have grown up understanding healthy relationships without ever having to unlearn toxic patterns first. They've never seen love paired with control, never witnessed manipulation disguised as protection, never learned to doubt their own perceptions to maintain peace. The nonprofit I founded has helped over 300 women navigate similar transitions. We've documented cases of abandonment during medical emergencies, financial sabotage disguised as protection, and emotional manipulation so sophisticated that the victims questioned their own sanity. But we've also documented hundreds of success stories, women who built new lives based on their own values rather than someone else's convenience. The most gratifying part of my work is watching women discover their own strength. They come to us broken, confused, often still making excuses for the people who hurt them. They leave with clear boundaries, practical skills, and most importantly, trust in their own judgment. Gary never attempted to rebuild a relationship with Emmett after his release from prison. According to Caroline Montgomery, he remarried someone equally self-centered and moved across the country to start fresh where no one knew his history. His mother sends Christmas cards to Emmett but never mentions her son. The silence speaks volumes about how completely he destroyed his own family relationships. Sometimes I wonder if Gary ever thinks about the life he threw away, the son he could have helped raise, the woman who once loved him unconditionally, the family that could have been his foundation instead of his burden. But mostly, I'm grateful he made his choices so clearly. A man who could abandon his wife during childbirth was never going to be a reliable parent. His absence protected Emmett from years of disappointment and emotional confusion. The woman I am now, confident, financially independent, surrounded by genuine relationships, exists because I was forced to discover that I could survive without Gary's approval. The strength I found in that hospital room, delivering alone, but not truly alone because I had Harriet's support, became the foundation for everything I've built since. I think about Caroline Patterson too, how that terrifying night in the hospital transformed her from a naive college student into a fierce advocate for vulnerable women. We often say that Gary intended to destroy both our lives, but instead he inadvertently freed us to become the women we were always meant to be. The baby in the next bed didn't just share Emmett's eyes, she shared his beginning. Born to mothers who learned that being abandoned by someone incapable of love isn't abandonment at all. It's liberation.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.